Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order released last week as the first single-player focused Star Wars game since the start of the decade. For a franchise that has such a rich history with the gaming medium as Star Wars, that's a pretty depressing statement, especially so once you consider that the series' current license holders, EA, have held the rights to produce games based in a galaxy far, far away since 2013, and have so far only produced 3 AAA Star Wars titles in Battlefront, Battlefront 2, and Respawn's new single-player experience. With 2 cancelled single-player Star Wars games looming over production on Jedi Fallen Order, to say that Star Wars fans have greeted its release with a sense of relief would be putting things lightly. It's a game they've been waiting for over 9 years, and while Respawn's acumen was never in doubt before release, excitement for Fallen Order ranged between tepid and cautiously optimistic. It soon became clear that demos shown to the public weren't selling the true scale or focus of the title, and as its release approached, many were starting to consider that it may just be the real deal. Is it? Well, yes, for the most part. I wasn't fortunate enough to procure a review code before release. Mind tricks evidently get you nowhere with the EA these days, but I have spent the last weekend playing Fallen Order to completion, and while that isn't perfect, it's a more than worthy addition to Star Wars' illustrious gaming past. It's ambitious, impassioned, and massively refreshing, even if it is let down by a lack of polish and other issues in a select few areas. So, with all that said, I'm Ewan from WhatCulture Gaming, and here's our review of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is a stunning-looking game. DICE developed a knack for realizing the look and feel of a galaxy far, far away with their 2 Battlefront titles. And while Fallen Order doesn't look quite as good, Respawn has still just as lovingly created it. The main character models all look the part, while the presentation on the whole is immaculate, whether you're scaling the arid cliffs of Dathomir or the lush jungles of Kashyyyk. It's elsewhere, though, where the mask starts to slip. Bearing in mind that I ran Fallen Order on a base model PlayStation 4 that whirs and creaks like a rickety old helicopter, my time with the game was littered with performance issues. Texture pop-ins were frequent, assets loaded into cutscenes in full view, lessening the emotional payoff of a pivotal story moment, and glitches in combat became frequent as the game approached its middle stages. Characters would refuse to fall off ledges and plummet to an early grave, also would glitch into the floor, preventing progression when enemies had to be cleared in order to advance to the next stage. Sadly, for all that the main character models looked the part, certain NPCs near enough looked like they belonged on last-gen systems. The level of polish just wasn't there, and it's incredibly disappointing, especially so given we're now at the end of the current console cycle. It's unlikely EA would have countenanced the thought of releasing Fallen Order after the holidays and after Rise of Skywalker, but a few more months to iron out the kinks would have definitely resulted in a better-looking product. Now onto gameplay, and Fallen Order's combat is pretty great, but it doesn't take long before it can start to frustrate more than entertain. When greeted with large groups of enemies, many will try and flank the player and cause them an issue. This would be fine if it was easy enough to switch between targets quickly and securely, but the game seems reluctant to let you switch to someone behind you when you're being attacked. It's a bit of a faff, and the lack of clarity over whether or not players should use the lock-on mechanic when dealing with groups of enemies can prove to be a bit of a hindrance too. Although the occasions where this resulted in death were few and far between, it did make a few of them feel just a little bit unearned on the AI's behalf, and that's not me being salty at all. Definitely not. Worse still is that when the player takes on a large group of enemies at once, Fallen Order's more considered approach to combat can quickly devolve into a panicked melee. That may be the point, to shake up the pace of combat, but that didn't always shine through when you're frantically hitting the evade button and locking onto everyone but the target you're trying to prioritize. Fallen Order's Metroidvania elements weren't telegraphed too clearly before release, and that's actually quite a shame. Backtracking and discovering new areas you weren't able to access the first time around was really fun the first few times, while turning the tables on those early enemy encounters with new weapons, force abilities, and experience helped showcase the development of Cal as a Jedi, as well as the player's own progress. Unfortunately, there were occasions where backtracking erred on the tedious side of things. Fallen Order's story requires players to return to planets they were previously unable to fully explore, but in traversing the same areas a second time around, those old enemies and AI patterns pretty much repeat themselves over and over again. The same quantity of troopers in the same order and type appear over and over, and it happens to coincide with a mid-act lull that breaks up Fallen Order's otherwise brilliant beginning and final third. Now, to be clear, there's nothing wrong with repeating enemies, but it has to be done in a way that lends itself to the narrative. Returning to a planet you've already liberated and having the same groups appear in the exact same way, fighting the same amount of native wildlife with the same weaponry just isn't compelling, and it's the one area where Fallen Order's Souls-like stylings grow stale. But now we come to the story, and it is a fantastic addition to the Star Wars canon. By far the most compelling element of a Star Wars game in this day and age has to be its story, and Fallen Order doesn't disappoint. Written by Aaron Contreras, Manny Hagopian, Matt Mincinovitz, and Megan Fausti, Respawn's Star Wars game brings players to the galaxy's lowest point, the transition between episodes 3 and 4. The Empire is an omnipresent force, and while the new Star Wars canon has already delved deep into this particular setting, Fallen Order finds itself in a unique position in that it elects to show the Empire's formative years. It's set only 5 years after the Jedi Purge, and the decision to open up the game on Bracca, a planet literally dedicated to scrapping those old cruisers and ships used in the Clone Wars, serves as a fantastic visual metaphor to showcase the transformation of Star Wars from the prequels to the original trilogy. Respawn have also assembled a compelling cast of characters. Cal Kestis, portrayed by Gotham's Cameron Monaghan, is a worthy enough protagonist, and he's far from the generic Star Wars archetype some predicted. Respawn's writers weave a harrowing past for Cal that lays bare the tragedy of the Jedi's downfall, while his mission to effectively restart the Jedi Order brings with it its own ethical quandaries that both Cal and the player will doubtlessly struggle to reckon with. Joining Cal is Eno Cordova's lovable robotic companion, BD-1, a contender for Star Wars' cutest droid and who is really the heart and soul of Respawn's game. They're brimming with personality, and the bond between Cal and his droid anchors the story right where it should be. Star Wars also finds itself with an additional assortment of compelling characters thanks to Respawn's efforts. Former Jedi Master Cira Junda, Deborah Wilson, is a complex character and an intriguing one at that, while Pilot Grease, though underdeveloped in places, also has his moments. Night Sister Merrin more than deserves a game of her own too, and it'll be a huge shame if we don't see more of these figures in further literature, particularly the Second Sister, who emerges from Fallen Order as the most intriguing of all the Inquisitors seen in the franchise yet. There is a tedious mid-act lull to deal with, but the first and final thirds are truly breathtaking. And now we come to one of my favorite things about Fallen Order, the lightsaber customization. Not a lot was made of Fallen Order's customization prior to release, and while the options to change the way Cal looks are disappointingly threadbare, lightsaber customization is the best it's ever gotten. Players can choose between 3 lightsaber colors to begin with, 2 if you didn't pre-order, in blue, green, and making its canon comeback, orange. The lattermost option is a unique draw, and it looks great, but it's not just the lightsaber crystals players can change. Respawn spared no expense and ensured that players can mix and match an array of emitters, switches, sleeves, and even metals to create their very own blade. And when you factor in the unlockable double-bladed lightsaber, no other Star Wars game can really compare when it comes to allowing players full control over their weapon, bar maybe Jedi Academy. Without spoiling anything too heavily though, I will say that the customization did feel at odds with the later story revelation. You see, Cal inherits his blade from his master, and while it's great Respawn gives players the tools to mess with their weapon right from the start, players searching for a more thematically resonant conclusion may wish to hold off changing their weapon until prompted by the game's story. There's been a trend with a lot of licensed games over the last 2 console generations where these kinds of titles never really prize difficulty as an asset. Most of the time that's because developers are more concerned with empowering players with specific roles. Batman Arkham has Bat fans become the Dark Knight by giving them an invulnerable skill set, while The Force Unleashed put players in the shoes of a ludicrously powerful Dark Jedi a year earlier. These approaches are fine in and of themselves, but they do lose something without that element of challenge. Fallen Order manages to find the right balance between the two by placing the player in the shoes of a Padawan who lost their master and who is still learning how to be a Jedi Knight in a now unforgiving galaxy. Confrontations require patience, and it's likely that most players will fail several times over before they finish the story even on the default difficulty. Well, at least I did, but anyway, that's really quite refreshing, with a more considered approach to combat only lending itself well to the Star Wars IP, and in a way, the Jedi way, with which audiences are already so familiar. Fallen Order's bosses are also brilliant to come up against. They're big, cinematic, and challenging in all the right ways, even if it is frustrating when you die and miss out on an optional encounter. From bosses to hubs now, because it's probably fair to say that Respawn created something really cool when they brought Grease Dreyer's ship, the Stinger Mantis, into a galaxy far, far away. It looks tremendous, and giving players the ability to roam the ship while in takeoff and hyperspace is a stroke of genius on their behalf. Players can customize Cal's lightsaber from within the ship, rest, and even admire Grievous' terrarium if they find seeds out in the wild. Pick up a boggling stowaway on Bogano and you'll be able to see it hiding in the vents, while players can also change the ship's paint jobs while finding crates in different levels. Sure, it's pretty fun, but the premise never gets expanded upon to the levels you'd really hope it would be. Sia pays reference to Star Wars' famed holochess game in dialogue, but even though there's a table on the Mantis seemingly built for such a game, it never gets used. I don't want to get bogged down in could'ves and should'ves or whatever, but it just seems obvious that the Mantis had so much more potential, even though it is a great addition to the Star Wars canon. Why not have a space battle segment? Let Cal sample Grievous' famed cooking, or even perform maintenance on the ship in the vein of Red Dead Redemption 2's camp. Anything to make it feel more lived in than it already does. Still, for all that the Mantis seems like a missed opportunity of sorts, the fact you can effectively play the loading screen is great fun, and is surely representative of Respawn's dedication to immersing players in a galaxy far, far away. When EA and Lucasfilm look back on the last generation of Star Wars games, it's likely both parties will draw negative conclusions. EA did resurrect the cult favorite Battlefront IP and diced with a controversy with both releases to deliver two genuinely great titles, but there's no ignoring LucasArts' legacy, or how the most beloved Star Wars games of all time were all single-player offerings. To that end, the high-profile cancellations of Project Ragtag and Project Orca, two separate single-player Star Wars games, have led many to believe that EA just doesn't see value in a single-player Star Wars title. Development on Fallen Order commenced before the publisher acquired Respawn outright, while the way the title was marketed before launch also ran into criticism when it became clear demos weren't showing the game's true focus. But for all the controversy, waiting, and just general whateverness when it comes to EA Star Wars, make no mistake, this is absolutely the game Star Wars fans have been waiting for. Overdue in many respects, but arriving at just the right time, a whole month before the Skywalker saga draws to a close, Fallen Order reiterates the value of Star Wars' single-player titles, and ranks alongside the very best licensed games ever released. It isn't without its problems, and the lack of polish can derail it at times, but in whisking players away to a galaxy far, far away, Fallen Order succeeds and then some. That's why I'm going to give it 3.5 stars.